Welcome back. Let's do something fun here. We're going to create our own load balancer. Now, when it comes to load balancing, we're going to use Nginx. And there's a few possible options that you can do. Nginx is popular, but also something called HAProxy is used a lot. Most of these tools just require a configuration file, and there are a ton of resources out there to help you online. But additionally, creating a load balancer by yourself is becoming less and less common. You see, most companies like Amazon, DigitalOcean, and most providers that provide infrastructure have already load balancer setups that you can implement easily. For example, DigitalOcean has load balancers that you can add to your servers. It's very, very simple. You don't really need to code, and you just click on a few buttons and everything is done for you. You also have Amazon that has elastic load balancing. That again, you just simply implement and configure. However, I want us to build a load balancer just to understand how it works and to just have the knowledge of how these things like Amazon and DigitalOcean, how these companies are able to implement load balancing. So let's give it a go. I have over here a fun little file, and you're going to have access to this at the end of this video so you can test out some of the load balancing techniques and load testing that we're going to do, because it is a lot of fun. Now, don't get overwhelmed with the code here. I just didn't use Express and used the native HTTP module in Node to just create a simple server that returns a fake favicon icon, and I do this just to make sure that we don't get any weird logs of missing favicon. And then simply we're just console logging. We're adding some response headers, but again, this isn't important. We're just console logging every time our endpoint gets hit with "I have been hit." And our server will be running here. Nothing too crazy. But I also have a Docker Compose file. Again, something that we've seen before. And this Docker Compose file is quite interesting. We have a few services. One is Web 1, the other one Web 2, and Web 3. Really creative with my naming here. But you see here that they simply have ports of 3000. And let's actually change these to different ports just so we have a better idea how they work. So they're each services on different ports. And all they're going to do is run the build command. Also notice here that we're not doing port forwarding. So that means, well, they're just on their own. Only what's inside the Docker container will have access to them. If we go to the build, that is the Docker file that builds these, I see that we're simply using Node. We're exposing port 3000. We're creating a directory called app, and we're moving the server.js file, which I've already shown you, and also the package.json file to run npm install. And then we have just the entry point and command, which is to run the server that we have over here. And there's nothing too crazy happening over here. But then we have something called load balancer. And this load balancer is building from an Nginx folder, which we haven't created yet. It's going to expose port 80, and we're going to have access to localhost 80. And it links web 1, 2, 3. And it also uses volumes and has this command. Now, I'm going to leave a resource in this project for you to read up on this. All it is it allows us to run Docker commands inside the container. And I've linked to an article that you can read more information on. Now, this isn't a typical setup when you do a load balancer, because we have everything under one container. If you remember, we want to have a load balancer that is on its own with different servers. Right now, we have everything in just one giant container. And I'm only doing this so we can demonstrate without me having to spin up all these different services on my laptop and just have everything in a Docker Compose file for demonstration purposes. But in real life, you have a load balancer machine on its own, a server on its own, a server 2 on its own, a server 3 on its own. But with this file, we now have a way to have the load balancer be hit through port 80 and then distribute the weight to the server 1, 2, and 3, which are going to be each running this copy of the server. So let's actually create this Nginx folder and create our Nginx load balancer. I'm going to say new folder, then Nginx. And in this Nginx folder, we have to create two things. First, we need to create a Docker file, because remember, we have to build according to Docker Compose. Now, in this file, we're going to do a simple Dockerfile command. We're going to just use the Nginx image that's already there, thanks to Docker Hub. And then we're going to copy a file we're going to create called nginx.conf, which is the configuration file in Nginx that we'll create shortly, and move it to our container in the default location that Nginx files, configuration files, should be. In our case, we'll just name it like this. That's it. We can use Docker Hub to just grab the container or grab the image, and then we can just configure it from our end. So let's create a new file now, and this will be our nginx.conf file. In here, let's start to work on our configuration file.